Hi everybody, this is Vicki Van Sickle. I am head counselor at Camp Penguin. We have 60 people here with us today, which is amazing. We're still waiting for a few more people to come in from the waiting room. But while you're waiting, if you can make sure that your microphone is muted, that your video is off, and if you want to say hello in the chat and maybe mention where you're from, that might be a fun place to start. So we're going to start very, very shortly, but in the meantime, make sure your microphone is off, make sure your video is off, and be sure to say hi in the chat. We'll chat soon. Hi, everybody. We're at 68 people. I think that's a good time for us to get started. Thank you so much for joining us at Camp Penguin. This is our second of 5 programs. Every day this week at 2 o'clock Eastern Time, we're doing a free virtual program that features one of the authors on our Camp Penguin program. Today's author is Tanya Lloyd, who's written many books for kids of all different ages. And before we get started and we pass it over to her, I just wanted to remind you of a few rules to keep things moving really smoothly. So first is to please keep your microphone off. You won't need to say anything for this presentation. Second is to keep your video off as well. You can use the chat. When we get started, I hear lots of things here from people all over Canada, North America. That's amazing, many different ages. We're gonna keep the chat conversation to the presentation. Tanya's gonna ask you some questions. There's going to be some exercises, and that's where we're gonna keep track of that. So I'll ask you please to keep any chatter from now on into the chat only related to the presentation. So it's going to be amazing. The other thing I wanted to let you know is at the end of this program, we're gonna pick one of the people who signed up today and are here on the program to win a copy of Tanya's latest book, Me and Banksy, which I might ask her a few questions about later. So I want you to make sure you're all set to go. You've got your video on mute, you've got your microphone on mute, and I'm gonna pass it off to Tanya, who's gonna tell us all about her presentation today. Thank you so much for joining us, Tanya.
There, now I'm actually unmuted. Hello, nice to see everybody today. There's lots of people here, and it's so nice that you could all come. This is one of my books called Maya's Strategy to Save the World, and it's the book that's inspired today's writing workshop. And it is based on some of the things that happened to my daughter Julia when she was in grade 7. When she was in grade 7, Julia was running an environmental club to try to save the world, but she also really, really, really wanted her own cell phone. And so she spent a lot of her time campaigning for a cell phone and a lot of her time trying to save the world. And one of the things she did was write letters. And my favorite letter that she wrote was a letter to try to save the whales. And this one is to the Embassy of Japan in Canada. And she was trying to ask Japan to stop hunting whales. And she said, "Dear Embassy of Japan in Canada, I am writing this letter to ask and encourage you to stop whaling. It's cruel, mean, and unfair, and every whale in the world agrees with me." And then she said, "There are a lot of other things you can eat. Whaling might seem like fun, but look at it from the whale's point of view." And that letter, I thought, was so sweet and kind of funny that it inspired my book. And the main character in my book, her name is Maya, and she spends a lot of her time campaigning to get a cell phone, but also a lot of her time running a social justice club at her school and writing letters to help stop child labor and stop climate change and save the refugees. And she's very bossy. So sometimes her friends rebel and they won't write her letters. And that's sort of the thing that she has to get over during the book. But the letters themselves are quite fun, and they make you like Maya because she really is trying hard to do good things for the world. So I'm going to ask Sam and Vicki from Penguin to start my slideshow, and we are going to talk about letter writing to change the world. And the first place we are going to change is the Pickle Factory. So hopefully we'll get some slides up here in a minute. Okay, problems at the Pickle Factory. This is what we are going to tackle. And in the next slide, we are going to meet Mr. Pickwick. Now, does he look happy? He is very mad. He's very mad because his workers at the Pickle Factory have stopped pickling pickles. And we are going to play a little game, kind of like a Mad Libs game, to figure out why his workers have stopped pickling their pickles. So Sam, if you will switch to the next slide, we will gather some evidence. So I need in the chat for you guys to type in one type of fruit. Type in a type of fruit. A peach. Okay, I saw a peach. That's the one I'm going to pick. And one type of candy. Type in a kind of candy that you like. Skittles. Skittles it is. I like Skittles. Okay, one thing that you love to eat. Oh, I saw 2 sushis. Let's go with sushi. You guys are very fast typers. And one thing that you would never eat in a million years, but it still has to be a food. Oh, squid, rotten eggs. What should we choose? Lobster. Lots of people like lobster. Brussels sprouts. Let's go with Brussels sprouts. Okay, now I need a really big number. That was really big. Trillion. We're going to go with a trillion. And, okay, a descriptive word, an adjective. Spooky? Let's go with spooky. And, okay, a music star. Should we do Billie Eilish? Billie Eilish. And a famous writer. Me, I'm not that. Oh, Mo Willems. Let's go with Mo Willems. Okay, and your favorite sport? Oh, I'm seeing lots of soccer. Okay, soccer it is. We're almost there. 2 more. We need your favorite dessert There's a lot of numbers in that dessert. Lots of ice creams. All right, ice cream it is. And somewhere in the world you would love to visit. Oh, Brazil. I saw 2 Brazils in a row, and Venice. Oh, should we do Brazil or Venice? Let's do Brazil. Brazil. Okay. So let's go to the next slide and see why Mr. Pickwick's workers have stopped pickling pickles. We're going to slot in the words we came up with. The Pickwick factory makes pickles out of cucumbers, onions, peaches, and Skittles. They're so good, everyone wants to buy them. They taste like delicious, crunchy sushi mixed with Brussels sprouts. Mmm. To keep up with demand, the workers are working trillions of hours a week. But wait, not all the pickles are getting to the stores. Some of the jars go into Mr. Pickwick's spooky office and never come out. What is going on? The workers have peeked through Mr. Pickwick's office window. They found him having lunch with Billie Eilish and Mo Willems, and everyone was eating pickles. And then Mr. Pickwick took the afternoon off to play soccer while his workers kept pickling. Does that seem fair? That doesn't seem fair to me. The workers said, "We're on strike. We're not pickling pickles until you stop eating so many. We want a raise, a free bowl of ice cream each, and a bonus trip to Brazil, or else." So that is the problem at the pickle factory. And maybe, Sam, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so the workers have gone on strike at the pickle factory. There's one of them now. And they have asked everyone to write letters to Mr. Pickwick in support of their strike. They want us to write to Mr. Pickwick and say, you need to meet the demands of the workers. You need to give them more money, more ice cream, and trips to Brazil. So do you think we can help? All right, if we go to the next slide. Now, it's a good thing you guys are good typists because this is getting a little more complicated. This is where we write our letter of protest. So when we write our letter of protest, the first thing we always do is write a first line that tells the person exactly what we want. So we're going to say, "Dear Mr. Pickwick, we are writing to ask you to..." I don't think we should ask him to blow up the factory. That seems a little harsh. People might not have jobs anymore. What should we ask him to do? Stop eating so many pickles, help the workers, stop playing soccer, and give everyone trips to Brazil. Okay, that seems like a really good first paragraph. We have summarized exactly what we want. Stop playing soccer in the afternoons while we're working. Stop eating so many of our pickles. Give us some trips to Brazil, some ice cream, and a raise. We support your workers and their demands. Now we're going to explain in our second paragraph, we're going to explain why this is necessary. We need you to meet these demands because why are the workers? Yeah, the workers are working so hard. Michelle's right. And the workers are going to quit. And he's kind of being mean to them by going to play soccer while they're putting in trillions of hours. So we're going to say this is necessary because your workers are working too hard. It's not fair. And also because, are there any other reasons we can add in our third paragraphs? You seem mean. And the workers will collapse and they have families to see. Oh, these are good reasons. The workers are getting barely any money. All right. And it will make your workers happy. And you know what? Happy workers are more productive. Those are perfect things to write. And then after we've said what we want him to do in the first paragraph and why we think it's necessary in 1 or 2 paragraphs after that, then we're going to be all polite and we're going to say, thank you very much for your time, or thank you for listening, or thank you for your consideration. It's going to be our final paragraph. And then we say, sincerely, the Pickle people, or the supporters of the Pickle people. And that Okay, this is a little bit silly because we're writing to Mr. Pickwick at the Pickle Factory, but that formula is exactly how Maya, in Maya's Strategy to Save the World, writes all her letters of protest, and it's exactly how any of us in real life could write a letter about something we're not happy about. So I'm going to ask Sam to go to the next slide. What would you write a letter about if you were going to write a letter of protest? Oh, somebody's written an entire letter there. Good job. If you in real life were going to write a letter protesting something, no hunting cheetahs. That's a good one. More chocolate. Do you know that in Canada, there was actually a time when the price of chocolate went up and kids from all across the country went on strike to protest the cost of chocolate going up? Stop throwing plastic in the ocean would be a fantastic letter. Black Lives Matter would be a fantastic letter. Everyone should get fed. You guys have so many good ideas. Stop climate change. Let nature live. We could spend days. No refugees. Stop animal cruelty. More dessert for everyone. Save the sea turtle eggs. I'm going to read 4 or 5 more before we stop here because these are so good. World peace, quality for everyone. Oh, they're going so fast I can barely see them. Save the planet, lots of Black Lives Matter. Be nicer to people. You know, our COVID health minister here in BC, she's always saying, be kind. That's one of her main messages. She could write that letter for us, no problem. Okay, let's flip to the next slide. You guys have, I hope you write these letters because they're so good. So the tricky thing about writing a letter is you have to figure out who to write your letter to. So sometimes if it's a letter about climate change, say, you might write to a government minister. You might write to the Minister of Environment. You could write to your state representative or your provincial premier. You could write to your mayor, depending on the issue you want to talk to. I'm not sure writing to Taylor Swift would be that helpful, but you never know. You could try. And if you're writing your own letter, you would follow exactly the same steps that we followed when we were writing to Mr. Pickwick. So you would talk about the thing that you want changed. Save the sharks is a very good one. Piscoli, that's Save the Sharks. Getting a COVID-19 vaccine is a good one. I think they're working pretty hard on that. Save the turtles. So you could write about the sharks and the turtles. You could write a Minister of Environment. You could write the United Nations. You could write the Minister of Environment in a country where those animals live or are hunted. So you have to do a little bit of research to figure out who to send your letter to. But yes, state what you want changed. In paragraph 2, explain why you think this change should happen, just like we said, because your workers are very tired. They're working trillions of hours and it's not fair. Paragraph 3, add some supporting facts. So again, this is a time when you might have to do a little bit of research to find out why we need to save the sharks or why we need to save the turtles. Step number 4 is our polite step. We say thank you for listening. Step number 5, sign your letter, and always put your address on your letter, especially if you're writing to a government ministry, because they will write you back and they'll tell you what they're going to do about your letter. Government ministries always write you back. Now, before we start some questions, there's a few things we can do to make sending a letter even more powerful, because one handwritten letter, they do things like this. Signing a petition online is worth a little bit. Governments pay a little bit of attention to it when you sign a petition online. When you send an email online, they pay a little more attention because they think, wow, this person actually took the time to write me an email. So they must really care. When you write a letter, they pay even more attention to it because you spent a lot of time to write and nail that letter. And they think, wow, this person's very dedicated. And if this person is dedicated enough to write a letter, there must be lots of people who really care about this, just like this person. So one letter alone is already very powerful. And there's a few things you can do to make it even more powerful, kind of like what Maya did. She started a club and she asked all her friends to write letters too. So if you get more people to write letters about the same thing, that amplifies your issues, amplifies your ideas, so makes it even a bigger deal. So that's a good idea, is get your friends to write letters too, or your brother, or your sister, or your parents. The number 2 step is to send your letter to more people. So you can take basically the same letter and you can send it to the Minister of Environment and to the Prime Minister or the President. You can send the same letter with a few little changes to a bunch of different people to make your letter more powerful. So more people receiving it, more people writing letters. And the third thing you can do is write your letter basically the same way and send it to a newspaper, because sometimes newspapers print these sort of letters and then a whole bunch of people see them. And you can ask those readers to write letters too. So those are some ways to make your letters even more powerful. And I hope that you will, because this is a online writing workshop, we don't actually get to sit down together and write protest letters, but I hope you do them. I hope you write down these steps on this slide, and I hope you maybe send a letter about something you really care about, such as clean toilets. Dennis really cares about clean toilets. So maybe we could all write letters about those. All right, we are going to have lots of time for questions about letter writing, about my strategy to save the world, about writing books in general, or writing in general. And I think Vicki from Penguin is going to read out the questions. So if you have questions about letter writing or about these books, then now's the time to type your questions.
That's exactly right. Thank you so much, Tanya. So if you have a question about writing or about Tanya's amazing book or anything else you'd like to know about what it's like to be an author, we want to hear from you. So you're going to put it in the chat. So I'm going to ask you to, I see all the things you're really concerned about, which is amazing, but now I'm looking for your questions. So we have a question from Michelle. Why did you write this book? What inspired you to write this book?
Mostly when I wrote this book, I just started writing down things that were happening to my daughter. She came home from school one day and her friend had thrown a water bottle at a boy's head. I mean, she had thrown it at his head so hard that it had cut his head and he was bleeding and he had to go home from school. And then her friend got in trouble and she got sent home from school in trouble, but it turned out that he had written a rude note to her. So she was kind of justified maybe in throwing the water bottle. It would have been better to throw a plastic water bottle. But that started me off. That's one of the first scenes in this book, and that started me off writing about funny things happening in the life of a grade 7 girl. It was great. Fun to write.
I have a question here that wants to know, what age did you start writing?
I know I wrote songs when I was very small, but I started writing books when I was in grade 5. We wrote in English class, we wrote stories and we stapled them together with real covers and it felt like a real book. And then in high school, I started writing longer books. I went to university for writing and I published my first book just a couple years after university. My first book was called Canadian Girls Who Rock the World, and it was all about girls who do great things.
We have a question of how many books have you published now?
I think I'm up to about 26. This book that came out after Maya is my newest one. It's called Me and Banksy. And it's about another girl who rebels against things. But the girl in this book's named Dominica. And she rebels not by writing letters, but by painting graffiti at her school.
That's an amazing book. And that's actually the book that we're going to do a giveaway for at the end of today. So we have a question here about what sort of tips would you have for aspiring writers? Maybe your top 3 tips. What are the top 3 things we need to know if we would like to be writers as well?
Top 3 tips for people who would like to be writers. I would say write as often as you can. So even if it's only 5 or 10 minutes a day when you wake up in the morning or before you go to bed, just write a few paragraphs, because the more you write, the easier it will become to write. I would say read lots of the type of thing that you would like to write. So if you want to write fantasy, then read lots of fantasy books. And if you want to write romantic stories about middle school, then read lots of romantic stories about middle school. And the third thing I would say is find a friend who also likes to write and trade stories back and forth and see how you can improve each other's stories.
I think those are great tips. Very easy to sort of put into practice right now if you want to start with a letter and then maybe you want to write a book about it. So we have a question here, a very serious question, Tanya. Do you like pickles?
I love pickles, and my husband does not like pickles. So I always forget to get them for myself, but every once in a while I get myself a jar. My favorite pickles are gherkins, the little tiny
ones.
pickles.
I think pickles are an interesting food in that people seem to either really like them or really not like them. I really like dill pickle chips, but I don't like pickles. So I don't know what that says about me. We have a question here about, do you prefer to write fiction or nonfiction?
Oh, I like both. Let's see here. I have these sorts of nonfiction books that I write too, that I do lots of research for, and research lots of the stories and the facts. And actually this one, Eyes and Spies, is all about privacy and surveillance, and it talks about video cameras in schools. And because I wrote that, then I started thinking about cameras in schools, and that's one of the main problems that Dominica has in me and Banksy, is the cameras in her schools. So sometimes they tie together. These are actually published by 2 different publishers, but they conveniently match. So I like both. I like doing the research, and I like writing the true stories, and I like finding those true stories that are really exciting. Writing nonfiction is like being a detective and finding the most interesting facts and the most interesting stories. But writing fiction is more, you get to write whatever you want. You get to be your own boss of making up the most interesting stories. So I can't decide is the problem, and I keep writing both.
Well, I think
and
really
somebody says they like writing comics.
Yeah, have you ever written a comic or a graphic novel? Have you done that?
I have never written a full graphic novel. I have written some little cartoon strips for my books, and it's kind of like writing a play. Like you just write the dialogue of people talking to each other, and I find it very fun. So maybe one day.
So we had a question here about, is Maya real? And we know that she's not, that she's based on your daughter and some of her friends. But here's a question, would she do an online workshop? And I think that's a neat question. If Maya could do an online workshop, what do you think her workshop would be on?
Maya is a little bit bossy. So her online workshop would definitely be on how to change the world. And she would have everybody writing letters, kind of like the Mr. Pickwick workshop, but she would tell everybody exactly what she wanted them to write, and she wouldn't allow anybody else to talk.
It might be a very short workshop in that case.
But she gets better towards the end of the book. She learns a little bit.
So we have a question here. How many hours do you write a day?
Oh, I usually, maybe about 3. 2 to 3. I usually get up in the morning, and after breakfast and things, then I sit down and do my writing quite early. And then after a few hours, my brain is tired. And when it's tired of doing the writing and creating part, then I do things like answer emails or do some research or kind of writing related things. But the creative stuff I do in the mornings. But that's kind of, everybody's different. I know some people who do their best writing right before bed. When I was in high school, I used to wake up sometimes with whole poems and stories in my head, and I would get up in the middle of the night and I would scribble them down and I would go back to sleep. And sometimes in the morning they would make sense, and sometimes they totally would not make sense.
We have a question here that's asking about the Illustrator. So how did you find the Illustrator or get the cover done? Now I know this is a slightly different question that you might not know all of the answers to, but this is something that we can maybe answer together. So if you want to answer first, Tanya, and you have any questions about that, I can add some stuff in from the publisher side, because this is an interesting thing about books that I think a lot of people don't know. So how did we find the Illustrator? Tanya, you go first.
The publisher finds the illustrators, so I don't find the illustrators at all. And luckily for me, the publisher finds the illustrators because I cannot draw and I need some illustration help. But the publisher finds the illustrator, and I think often the illustrator does maybe an idea or 2 and sends it. When I'm working on the nonfiction books that have lots of illustrations inside, then they often send me sketches. Not for me to say whether I like the illustrations or not, but for me to say, oh, actually, that picture of the Roman army, they should have had round hats instead of pointed hats, so I can check the facts in the illustrations. But mostly by the time the illustration happens and the cover happens, then my part of the work is done, because I've finished the writing and I've finished the editing, and I just get to look at somebody else's work and somebody else's interpretation, and it's really fun for me. But yes, Vicki can probably add to how the publisher finds the illustrator.
Yeah, because that was something that was new to me until I started working in publishing. So in most cases, an illustrator, either for the art on the inside or the cover, is chosen by the editor and the art director. And they work with a lot of different illustrators. We collect their portfolios, and we have to sort of find just the right illustrator. A lot of it is about tone. So in Maya's strategy to save the world, it's very funny. So even though we're talking about saving the world and some serious things like social issues and social justice, it's hysterically funny in parts. And so we wanted to make sure that the humor was there. And if you want to hold it up again, Tanya, so people can see, I think you can tell by looking at it, there's just a lightness to it, and you have an understanding that, you know, this is going to be a fun book. It doesn't look too dark or too intense or too scary. You can also tell it's probably not going to be fantasy, right? You can tell that there's something about the real world here. So this is something I find really interesting, and then we do look at a number of cover sketches, and we debate which one we think gets the message across the best. So that was a really great question. A really easy question for you now, or maybe it's not an easy question. Do you have a favorite animal? And if you do, what is it? That's from Ella and Parker.
Oh, I did. Somebody mentioned actually cheetahs earlier, and I've always really loved cheetahs just because they're so fast. And I feel like if you're going to do something, you may as well do it better than anybody else. And cheetahs run better than anybody else. So I have always loved cheetahs. My daughter, who inspired Maya, her favorite animal has always been dolphins. It changes though, especially lately, because I've been looking at cute animals on the internet, and lately I saw a baby armadillo, and now I kind of want one.
Very cute. I follow a lot of baby animal things on social media because they're just so cute. So we have a question here about your next book. Can you tell us if you have any ideas about what your next book might be?
Oh, well, I have an information book, a nonfiction book coming out about stereotypes, which was really interesting to write. It's all about how our brains categorize things sometimes without telling us they're categorizing things and people. So that was quite fascinating to research. It's called This Is Your Brain on Stereotypes. But I'm also working on a novel about a girl who works on her school podcast, and she gets censored. So the principal and the teacher won't let her talk about a climate strike in her podcast. And it's about what happens to her. She's very shy, and she has a lot of trouble speaking out. But when this censorship happens, she gets really mad. And so it's about whether she can manage to speak out or not.
Sounds great. I think you're good at both fiction and nonfiction, so it's always exciting to have a new book from Tanya. We have a question here about how long does it take you to write a book?
Probably about a year. Sometimes a little shorter, sometimes a little longer. Maya's strategy took a little more than a year because I was working on other things too, and I finished the whole manuscript, and then I sent it off to Penguin, and I said, would you like to publish this manuscript? And they said yes, which I was super excited about. And they said not only yes, but they said, we will give you a contract to write 2 books. And this had never happened to me before. So I was really excited, and I signed the contract, and I said, Penguin's going to publish 2 of my books. And then after that, I realized that the problem was I only had 1 book. And I only had a year to write my second book, and I had no idea what it was going to be about. So I have a writer's group. You know, when I said, show your friends you're writing and trade comments? Well, I have some friends that do that. And I sent them part of 1 book, and then I sent them part of another book, and then I sent them part of another book. And I was all in a tizzy about what this book was going to be about. But I had started a few chapters about Dominica and her friends, Holden and Sanvi. And I really, really liked the 3 of those friends, but I didn't know what the book was about until I started thinking about cameras in the classroom. And that's how Me and Banksy came to be. But yes, Me and Banksy was written in less than a year because I got all excited and signed that contract. And then I realized that signing that contract meant I had to write another book.
Well, we're really glad that you did. I'm going to have 2 more questions. So the first question is, what is your favorite scene in Maya's strategy to save the world? Or was there a scene that was really fun to write?
Oh, I think my favorite scene is one that happened in real life, because when my daughter was in grade 7 and she was sitting at the breakfast table and she was saying, Daddy, I really need a cell phone. And he was saying, no, you can't have a cell phone. And she said, okay, what if I'm in grade 12 and all the other kids in my class have a cell phone? Then can I have a cell phone? And he said, very seriously, he said, all the other kids? And she's like, yeah, all the other kids. Every single one of them has a cell phone. She said, every single one of them. And he said, then I guess you'll be the only one in grade 12 without a cell phone. It was like, oh, Daddy. But so that exact scene, I wrote it down and I put it in my strategy to save the world. Now, my daughter is now in grade 11, and you'll be happy to know that she does have her own cell phone. But you'll have to read Maya to find out whether she gets hers.
Amazing. So we have one last question, and this is actually, it's a combination. There's a number of questions in the chat that have been sort of about this. But why do you like writing, or what is your favorite thing about writing?
Oh, that's a good question. I like that nobody tells me what to do or what to think, and I get to write down whatever happens to be in my head. And sometimes whatever happens to be in my head that day turns out to be nonsense, but I write it down anyway. And sometimes bits of nonsense come together and become a book.
Amazing. I love that. Makes you sound a little bit like Maya. So again, thank you so much for joining us today, Tanya, and thanks to everyone who came to our Camp Penguin workshop. I hope that you learned something about writing letters. I hope you had a good laugh. I hope you learned about cheetahs, and I see we've been talking about polar bears in the chat as well. So just a reminder to check your emails. Someone who is here today is going to win a copy of the second book that Tanya has written for us, Me and Banksy. We'll email that out today. And again, stay tuned for more Camp Penguin programming. So we have 3 more events this week coming up. And also check out the books. These are great Canadian books by Canadian authors. We think you're gonna love them. Thanks again, everyone, for coming. And thanks again, Tanya.
If you write a protest letter, go on my website. There's a contact form and send me a copy. I'll be so impressed.
That's a great idea. Tanya, if you just wanna put your website into the chat. So if you wrote a letter right now, Tanya's going to put her website in the chat. You can check it out there, and she wants to know about it. I think that's a great idea. Thanks so much, everyone, and thanks, Tanya. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Bye.